Let's talk about doubt. Peter, that blessed man in whose life many Christians find a reflection of themselves. Peter, he was always quick to talk and slow to listen, always ready to defend his position. Peter was often unaware of who he was and what he was capable of doing. That same Peter shares a very similar story to all of us. He was invited by Jesus to take an unusual journey, a journey that we all take at some point in our lives. Though the circumstances may be different, same in principle. Let me explain. So during a storm, Jesus came to his disciples walking on water. They were afraid at first until Jesus identified himself. Peter was not so sure and says, "Lord, if it is you, invite me to come on the water where you are." Jesus says, "Come." Peter now starts walking on water. And the Bible tells us, but when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out saying, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" Matthew 14:30 and 31. How many times have you felt like Jesus looks you square in the face and asks the same question? "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" We often come to God with our requests during our storms. Peter's way to deal with his problems was to face them head on. He was the only one who stepped out on the water. He wasn't one to stay in the boat and wait. In his heart, Peter desired to go where Jesus was, out from the place of safety and comfort that he was familiar with and into the foamy sea, the terrible wind. With his heart racing, I imagine Peter stepping forward as he was reaching out, Jesus smiling with his hands out waiting, and then Peter realizing where he was. He was in the middle of the storm, the middle of the journey. Doubt is a great exaggerator of our problems. It is forgetful of God's promises. It always distrusts God's call in the middle of the journey. So do not let it creep in, no matter how terrible the storm may be. Here's the thing about doubt. It always paints a dismal picture of our present and promises failure and sometimes death in our future. When God calls us in answer to our prayers, we must go and not change our minds in the middle. Even when doubt says the storm is terrible, you are really in it now. If Jesus thought he would not have called you, you have to silence those words and still go. Why? Because you cannot afford to sink. You were called to walk on water, not to sink beneath the waves. Here's how James writes it in James chapter 1. "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting. For he who doubts is like a wave of the sea driven and tossed by the wind. For let not that man suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways." James chapter 1, verses 5 through 8. For a while I wrestled with this verse until God finally spoke to me. You see, a man who comes to God in prayer amidst his trial should never change his mind about what God can do. If you start with belief, you approach God thinking, knowing that he can solve the issue. Don't let doubt creep in. Because when it does, we get tossed like the restless waves that are subject to the wind. They move in any and every direction, slamming against each other. Waves driven without any ability to restrain themselves. When doubt creeps in, it removes stability and gives way to instability. It takes away sleep and provides restlessness, and we cannot afford to have those things in our lives. So are you in a storm right now? Is the situation beating you down? Is your heart heavy? Are your eyes tired because before you saw this video, you were weeping? I'm here to tell you, pray, trust, and your trembling faith, yes, that tiny mustard seed is enough to face the deluge of discouragement, enough to withstand the heartbreak. It is enough to carry you through the disappointment and the loss. Don't change your mind about God and what he can do for you when you ask him through faith. Don't doubt. Walk by faith and with strength. Be not dismayed, and your heavenly Father will take good care of you. He has called you. He loves you, and He will not give up on you. Ask in faith and do not doubt.